Welcome to Biztech's Enterprise Technology Show. Now, hi, I'm Brian Fernandez, and today we're going to take a deep dive into generative AI and its current and future impact in the Asia Pacific region. Now, we're going to do this together with Deepak Ramanathan. He's the Vice President of Global Technology Practice at SAS Institute. SAS is a global leader in AI and analytics software and has over 83,000 customers worldwide, including Fortune 100 companies. Now, tell us more, Deepak. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
Now, Deepak, could you just give us tell us a little bit more about SAS and your role within the company?
Sure. So SAS is, of course, it's the world's largest privately held software company. We're also one of the world's oldest analytics companies. We were formed in 1976. So this is almost our 48th year. It was passed in July. And over a period of these 48 years, we have been working with a lot of customers across the globe and in different industries: financial services, telco, government, manufacturing, amongst the prominent few, in helping these customers, these clients, achieve their business outcomes with analytics. Right. So, right back in the mid 80s, when we worked a lot with governments and banks, when big data was just being gathered, accumulated, the year of the mainframes, and then, moving over to different architectures, technologies, and of course, entering the age of commoditized analytics, and then of course of big data, and then now where we are, which is GenAI, and the larger AI model. And SAS has been on the ball in being able to provide solutions, and as the customer needs have changed over the last 48 years. And as you mentioned, a large percentage of the Fortune 500 companies are currently SAS clients. Now, my role is I run something called the Global Technology Practice. It's a team of critical experts in areas of architecture, in areas of analytics, in areas of data, and they're spread across the globe, in the Americas, in EMEA, and here back home in APAC. So I lead this team, and it's a fun job. It's a fun job.
Okay, now you've been in SAS for 22 years. You obviously have a global lens around data and analytics in particular.
Right.
How do you foresee Gen AI impacting the economic landscape of the industry with various industries within the Asia Pacific region? Particularly given the fact that, yes, it's a buzzword, but it's a lot more to that. It's transformative.
Right. So yeah, absolutely. It is transformative. I know. And I think the buzz started in November of 2020. Was it 2022? I think, when the first Chat GPT was released, and then there was this massive excitement around when new technology comes out, it never is short, but it looks like it is magical, right? And that's what I think the power of Gen AI provided to people. It just seemed magical in terms of this entering a prompt, entering a question, and getting answered it answered in a very lucid way. It really seemed like magical. And then of course, companies started to think about, like, how can we benefit from this, right? I mean, it's not that chatbots have not been there before. If your local bank always has some flavor of a chatbot for the past 5, 6, 7 years, but the difference was those chatbots were all rule-based chatbots, right? This one was essentially built on a giant neural network, so it was able to sort of answer with a degree of certainty about what it was answering. And I think that's what triggered off a lot of the curiosity in companies, which is, how can we benefit from what we see as Gen AI? So naturally, I think because it was an open technology, because people could access it, and I think you have to see this in parallel with the general world of technology, right? And what I mean by that is, Brian, is that if you remember that this technology was released sometime in November 2022, and then just 6 months later, Facebook released its own open source Llama 3 model. right? And then there was this rush of different models from different parts of the world coming in. There was Claudia coming in from Europe. Then there was Mistral coming in from France, and these are all open source models. So what is that? What did that lead to? That led to a lot of people being able to experiment out on their own, right? That was the big capability where not only you had the GenAI models that were there provided by OpenAI, by Google with Gemini, etc., but it also allowed users to experiment. And I think that was the growth and the potential that you could see that, hey, here is a business use case I have. Can I take this open source model, open source large language model that is there, feed it my corpus of documents, and then try to make some sense out of it? The availability, I think, was the reason why there was so much of hype around it, because it was easily available, and you could start consuming large language model output very, very easily. So what's happened, I think, all of last year has been organizations looking at what kind of use cases they could build out, right? And there have been a lot of use cases, whether it's work process automation, summarizing large kind of documents, the famous, that acronym TLDR, too long did not read,
Yes.
right? Being able to pass a document into a large language model and say, let's just summarize this for me and tell me what the results are. I mean, all these people were looking at their day-to-day jobs and trying to see, can I look at a large language model assisting me to do my day-to-day job that much more effectively, that much more conveniently, and productivity gains that come along with it. So absolutely, that's been the game changer, because people have seen the value of what they could do with these large language models, right? And the entire GenAI process that came in. So, I would just like to add here, I mean, GenAI is not just, the other part of GenAI that became really interesting was GenAI is no longer just about unstructured text. It's not text generation. GenAI also lends itself to structured data generation, which has a huge impact for organizations, especially organizations, who are trying to build out, where I come from, SAS, statistical models, right? And when you have very small amount of data, with this synthetic data generation, they call it, you can actually generate large amounts of data and build models that are a lot more accurate. So suddenly with GenAI, whether you're generating unstructured data or if you're generating structured data, the potential just expanded. And that's where I think people are right now. And most of them are doing these experiments and trying to find out how do they operationalize some of their content.
And this dovetails very well with literally SaaS's traditional business, isn't it?
Right.
It's around decision making, it's
Right.
around predictions.
Absolutely.
And it's also around making cost reductions.
That's right. It does. And so historically, we have been a statistical company, right? With a lot of algorithms that we bring forth, the regular algorithms that we have, and a lot of these large language models work on neural networks, right? And advanced varieties of neural networks. So we see that as an offset of the fantastic compute that you could do now, right? And you can see a lot of companies like NVIDIA profiting from that compute, right? That's now been made available to them, that you can train a large language model, or you can query a large language model, and then get the outputs out of it. But we also believe, and like you correctly pointed out, I don't think it's an end to a mean, because it's the large language model's output still needs to get converted into a decision, right? And that's very critical, which is how does that summarization, for instance, then translate into a decision? And that's where customers are. A lot of our clients are talking to us, which is they can get the output, but how do you convert into a decision, and therefore an optimization, and therefore a cost benefit coming out of it for achieving that business outcome.
So then, Deepak, you've done and SAS has done a recent survey, which basically in the Asia Pacific region came up with a staggering number that 94% of APAC organizations plan to invest in Gen AI in the next year.
Right.
But interestingly enough, only 10% of organizations are fully using and implementing Gen AI.
Right.
That's quite a disconnect.
It is. And I will, sure, and we would love to explain that. I mean, like you said, I think everybody sees the potential, right? And like I said, when any new technology comes out, I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who mentioned, like, any new technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And that's how people was looking at Gen AI, all of these capabilities last year. And there was also a FOMO in there, the fear of missing out, because
Yep.
a lot of them also looked upon it as competitive differentiation, perhaps, right? So hence the requirement that a lot of them were actually going into, saying like, yes, it was a top item for the agenda of a lot of CIOs and CMOs and anybody in the CXO business, right? Who's saying like, yes, I think we could definitely benefit around it. However, that 10% is what we are realizing is that it's hard, right? This is where you're getting down into the weeds, right, of understanding how the large language model works, right? And more importantly, now a lot of them, there's OpenAI is, like I said, it's a gold standard. It's pretty much set the standard. But a lot of our customers would like to keep the model in-house, right? They want to keep the model in-house because they are going to train their model on a corpus of data could have a lot of a privacy impact, right?
Yeah, and that's a very, very important thing that people don't think about hard enough, but it is a very important thing. If it has to be contained for data privacy issues, for competitive advantages issues, as well as security issues.
Correct. Absolutely. And so I think that's the trend that you're also seeing. And so you can imagine it's a ripple effect, right? I mean, like, there is this wonderful thing like ChatGPT, and people are starting to use it. And then suddenly come July of last year, almost a year ago, Llama 3 comes out, right? And Mistral comes out. And all of these other open source models comes out. So our customers now have an option to say, you know what, let's see how it looks like when I'm keeping it in-house, right? So a lot of last year, I think end of last year, September onwards of last year, most of the clients that we were talking to had some kind of experiment going on with a large language model, right? And given the customers that we typically work with, financial services, government, a lot of them were wanting to do this in-house because for them, there's a lot of privacy impact because of the data that they have about their client base, their customers, their business customers. So a lot of them have been actually now trying out how does it pan out. So of course, when it pans out, they're figuring two things. One is it's hard work, right? Because there are a lot of moving parts. I mean, we just hear about large language models, but there are a lot of scaffolding that is surrounding the large language model, holding it up. And like scaffolding, sometimes it's prone to breaking. So I think a lot of clients who are trying out that 10% are typically folks who have kind of figured out some kind of working model where it's, they're getting their desired output. The remaining 80, I think, are struggling still to manage the cost and to justify the business outcome that really, manages what the cost implication is going to be, what the cost savings are, as opposed to operating cost.
And Deepak, this is a very pertinent questions facing CIOs right now because they're being questioned by their other CXOs and saying, hey, hang on here, we spent all this money.
Right.
We have nothing to show. We've spent a lot of money in technology over the pandemic. We've now got on the next bandwagon of spending money. We haven't seen the payback yet. So that's really a problem that CIOs need to grapple with right now.
Absolutely. And the CIOs, I think if I was in the CIO's place, I would talk to my stakeholders about the famous Gartner's hype cycle, right? And if you look at the hype cycle, I think last year was the hype cycle, right? And this year we are what we call in the trough of disillusionment, right? that 10% that you're looking at. But eventually you will learn from that, and those activities that you're doing will get a return of investment. But I think it was every time some new technology comes out, we believe that no, this one is not like the hype cycle. but we figured out like very quickly, like, oh, it is like the hype cycle, right? So that's exactly what's happening. That 10% is a trough of disillusionment where they're looking to sort of then get across that.
Okay, but Deepak, there's an outlier to this, and it comes out in your study.
Yeah.
China, 80% are using Gen AI already. So
Yeah.
that's quite a phenomenal change from the rest of the region.
Right.
What are the drivers for that? Why is there such a disparity then?
That's so. One of the things is, of course, like the large Chinese CSPs, for instance, they started building out their own large language models, right? And they had a corpus of data they could train on, which is mostly Chinese documents, right? Because it is the most spoken language. It's the most spoken language in China, of course, right? So their interactions with the models tend to be typically around a Chinese corpus of documents, right? That was one. I think also in China, the general mood was that they felt that this was AI generally. Forget about whether it's Gen AI or whether it's synthetic data generation or it's predictive modeling. The general feeling across the country is that this is a leapfrogging technology, right? And therefore, they have not put in any kind of restrictions in how you would actually go ahead and use the technology, right? So, facial recognition, being being able to get that data information very easily. That's not been a constraint for in China. So in many ways, they have really leapfrogged in terms of not really going to the traditional predictive analytics world, but moving just into the AI world in a level of sophistication that the world has not seen. So,
and so Deepak, then, which begs the question around a very important point you just brought up, the regulatory framework.
Right.
So there's already pushback in the Western world around the impact of Gen AI, in fact, AI as a whole. How do you see this influencing the development of AI? Because you could have a two-speed kind of development where China moves ahead and leapfrogs because of the looser regulatory framework, and then the Western world and to some extent the rest of the world then is a follower because it is much more tightly regulated.
Well, yeah, and so if I go back to 3 years ago, even before this whole Gen AI piece came in, I mean, Singapore, I think, was one of the first governments in the world to build out regulation, what they called the FEAT principles, right? And so they were looking at more from a bias perspective, that if you make a machine learning algorithm, how do you sort of prevent bias to come into those decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was the premise of the Singapore government when they came out with their regulatory framework, which was just in time because I think machine learning was shooting up at that moment of time where we were making a lot of these automated decisions, where it was not a question of like, it was more about the accuracy that mattered, not as much of like what were the data variables that were used to get that accuracy. So I think to rein it in, I think Singapore came out with the first regulatory framework. But I think, and they built a wonderful model where it was a discussion between government and industry, and software vendors like SAS, which is how do we get those guardrails in to make sure that bias doesn't creep in, the citizens get a fair chance at wherever a decision is being involved towards any benefits or welfare that's being targeted towards them. So that was the initial parts of it. And I think when Gen AI came out, there was a little more concern about the harm it can do, right? And we have all seen it, right? We see fake videos on a daily basis, and about right now those fake videos are being sort of tagged and said, hey, this is a fake video. But when does it stop, right? When the tagging stops and you start getting videos and that are of concern, right? That could come out of concern. So I think governments across the world, the US came in with regulation sometime last year around Gen AI principles and how you're building those Gen AI models around bias, etc. Europe also has been leading the way more than anybody. They set the first regulatory aspects of AI, and then GenAI, and the rest of the world has followed. I mean, whether it's Australia, and even it's not just the Western world. Even Japan, for instance, has come out with its regulatory AI. I think the goal is to be able to provide guardrails, right? That's the idea, because you want to make sure the government sort of regulates it by saying to private players, saying like, you have to work within these guardrails, right? Or else there could be enormous danger to society because of some of these Gen AI capabilities that are being brought forth and getting sophisticated every day.
Okay, then in this case, Deepak, let's put a scenario. I'm a CIO of a conglomerate in Asia, in Southeast Asia.
Right.
Why should, and I want to embark on, I've done little experiments, and I need to embark on my AI, generative AI and AI journey to make me more efficient, help the business be have better visibility and predictability and reduce cost.
Yeah.
Why should I choose SAS compared to any other vendor to help me in this journey?
Sure. So one, of course, is one is our heritage, right? We are a 48-year-old statistics company, an analytics company, right? And you may call it anything you want to, whether it's Gen AI, whether it's large language model. The bottom line is it's still math, right? And we have been doing math for the last 48 years. And like you mentioned up on the top of the call, servicing, a large percentage of those Fortune 500 companies who rely on our math, right? And I think it's the trust that we have built out over these last 48 years, which continuously draws customers to SAS, because they do see us as a trusted entity, and all the applications that we are building is so aligned to what the regulatory requirements are there within that country. So they see that as an extreme plus. And like I said, we are working with even the regulators in all of these countries, because they also see us as a trusted entity, right? So it's like I said, it's that trifecta, which is of the regulator, of the private parties, and also the software vendor, and they all see us as a trusted vendor. Other than that, also is the fact that we are constantly investing in how do we sort of figure out what way can AI serve the customer the best, right? How do we incorporate it into their current workflow, right? How could we sort of get them to have the power and the trust in the decision that they make, right? I mean, a lot of these organizations make thousands and tens of thousands of decisions a day, right? If they were to automate some of those, how can they get the trust that the decision is going to be a trusted decision? So I think those are areas why customers continue to be to sort of flock to SAS and continue to be partners with us.
Deepak, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I've learned a lot. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, it's going to be it's an exciting time, right? I mean, like you saw that 90% want to invest, but 10% are going to be successful. That 10% is going to grow out in the coming days and months and years, right? I think it's a technology that cannot be wished away. It is here to stay. And for the folks who are listening into this webcast, all I would say is, look at how it can benefit. Look at your existing business processes, right? Can it help you automate your campaigns, right? Your marketing campaigns. Can it be a co-pilot for some of your employees in terms of helping them out in their day-to-day tasks, right? And I call that as kind of a co-pilot kind of framework. So there are many use cases that you can definitely leverage. It's a great technology. And I would strongly encourage people to start investing and investigating what can be done.
Deepak, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Brian, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure being here. Thank you.
We've been speaking to Deepak Ramanathan. He's the Vice President of Global Technology Practice at SAS. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to Biztech's Enterprise Technology Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.